Most of us are conditioned to handle betrayal through established channels. We walk away, we seek legal counsel, or we wait for time to dull the sting. But for a rare few, these responses are insufficient, replaced by a singular demand for absolute physical retribution. This shift occurs at a specific internal threshold. When an injury strikes so deep that it destroys a person's sense of dignity, the standard rules of social conduct often cease to matter. Today, we're looking at two men who found themselves in that exact position, pushed into a corner with nothing left to lose and no path forward but violence. In 14th century France, Jean de Carouge was a decorated squire who spent his life fighting for status in the 100 Years' War. 3 centuries later, Jiro Sayemon lived a parallel life of status and struggle in Edo, Japan. A wealthy charcoal merchant, he moved through the city's pleasure districts carrying the visible scars of a childhood bout with smallpox. Despite the vast differences in their cultures, both men are about to face a crisis that tests the limits of their endurance. For years, Jean's closest ally was Jacques Legris. Their bond was forged on the battlefield, a friendship so deeply rooted that Jean asked Jacques to serve as the godfather to his firstborn son. That trust was shattered when Jacques exploited Jean's absence, forcing his way into the estate to assault Jean's wife, Marguerite. He left her with a simple threat: speak of this and die. In Edo, Jiro Sayemon sought a different kind of connection. After a lifetime of being shunned for his appearance, he found apparent acceptance from Yatsuhashi, a high-ranking courtesan who seemed to see past his disfigurement. He poured his entire fortune into keeping her favor, going completely bankrupt in the process. But when his money vanished, so did her warmth. She began to ignore him entirely, revealing that his emotional investment had been a one-sided illusion. These men weren't just losing property or pride. They were watching their deepest vulnerabilities, the things they had finally felt safe sharing, turned into weapons against them. Jean attempted to resolve the crime through the law, but the local court was presided over by Jacques' patron. The case was dismissed without a second thought, leaving Jean with no local recourse. Bypassing corrupt courts, Jean appealed for a trial by combat, a fight to the death. The background crowds highlight the public risk. If Jean lost, Marguerite would be burned at the stake for perjury. Jiro Sayemon's descent was equally public. Penniless and desperate, he followed Yatsuhashi through the streets, begging for even a single word of kindness to validate the life he had thrown away for her. During a grand procession, she stepped past him as if he were invisible. In front of a crowd of onlookers, Jiro Sayemon was reduced from a wealthy merchant to a laughingstock. When the systems of justice fail and the community joins in the humiliation, the final ties to social order begin to fray. The duel in Paris began with a clash of steel and the death of both horses. The knights were forced into a desperate melee, where the larger Jacques eventually managed to stab Jean through the leg. As Jacques looked to the crowd, Jean lunged. He tackled his former friend, pinned him to the earth, and pried open his faceplate. When Jacques still refused to admit his guilt, Jean plunged a dagger into his throat. For Jiro Sayemon, the public dismissal in the street was the end of his restraint. He retrieved a short sword, a named blade called the Kagutsurube, and prepared to end his ruin. He cornered the terrified Yatsuhashi on a tea-house staircase. With a single strike, the merchant ended her life, his blade cutting so deep that her remains tumbled separately down the wooden steps. At this point, the consequences of the act no longer matter. Both men have traded their futures for a single moment where they are no longer the victims, but the masters of the situation. Jean de Carouge was hailed as a hero by the king and the people alike. He walked away with a massive fortune, and his family's honor restored in the eyes of the law. Jiro Sayemon's end was far less grand. He was cornered on a rooftop and was eventually knocked down with a heavy bucket of water before being dragged away by guards to face an executioner. Society rewarded one man's violence and condemned the others, yet the internal collapse that preceded their crimes was the same. Looking at the parallel paths these men took, despite their different worlds, they both moved towards the same point where their dignity was so thoroughly compromised that their behavior became untethered from their surroundings. History suggests that when a person is stripped of their standing and denied any path to justice, the results are rarely quiet. Whether in a 14th century arena or a 17th century tea house, the removal of a person's dignity often creates a void that only violence can fill.